A deep dive into the business of Bitcoin mining with Nathan Poole. The 256 report starts now. Today I have a very special guest, Nathan Poole, who's going to be joining us at the virtual conference on March 11th. If you'd like to join us, there is a link right here where you can purchase a ticket. It is a must-see event if you are in the Bitcoin mining business or would like to be in the Bitcoin mining business. We have a great show lined up for you. It goes from 9 in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. It's going to be a full day of Bitcoin mining business. And Nathan Poole is going to be joining us at 4 p.m. Central Time, and he's going to be talking about the business of being in the Bitcoin business. I have Nathan on today because we're going to talk about something different. I'd like to get into a new conversation that would reach people outside the Bitcoin bubble. I think we speak to a lot of people that have been orange-pilled, but I'd like to reach outside of that world, the other 95% that don't know what Bitcoin is, much less Bitcoin mining. We can do this and add another zero to the Bitcoin market cap. Nathan is a certified general contractor and real estate broker in the state of Florida. He's built numerous businesses in the real estate and construction industries and transitioned to building out mining facilities. Nathan approaches mining from a business and tax perspective. Please welcome our guest, Nathan Poole. Welcome, Nathan, and thank you for being on the show today. I appreciate you stopping by.
Hey, I appreciate the invite, John, and I'm excited to be here.
So you're out at a mine. Where are you right now?
I am actually outside of one of our mining facilities, which is why I'm in a vehicle, because all of the buildings are very loud. And so I'm at our mine in North Carolina. We've got a couple sites in Florida that we've got too, but right now I'm in North Carolina and at one of our mining spots. This particular site is a 7.5 megawatt site.
And is North Carolina, you find that to be a competitive energy market where Bitcoin mining is profitable?
Yeah, you can get in North Carolina the most aggressive rates that Duke offers. So it's not going to, nationwide, the most aggressive nationwide rates that Duke offers. So it's not going to be as competitive as, say, your own power plant, like the Riots and the Bitdeers of the world. And it won't be as competitive as, say, like on a dam or flare gas or something, with hydro or stranded gas. But outside of those other two options, I found it to be the most aggressive pricing you can get.
That's fantastic. I know that there's a lot of interest in that mid-Atlantic coast in Bitcoin mining in North and South Carolina. So it's good to hear that business is good out there. We are talking about the zero factor, how we can add another zero to the value of Bitcoin, add to the market cap, and make Bitcoin more profitable for everybody, and how we can bring more people into the Bitcoin universe. Everybody asks, what is Bitcoin? 95% of the world doesn't know what Bitcoin is. How can we effectively communicate the value proposition or what Bitcoin is?
It's just a lot of education. So most people don't even understand what the dollar is. So then you're trying to go deeper down the explanation of what money is. And it just gets really complex for people that haven't really started to dive into what fiat is. And so I think to understand Bitcoin, you have to understand dollars. And I guess in like a very brief summary, if you don't understand that a private entity called the Federal Reserve, this is a privately owned bank. It's no more federal than Federal Express, right? A privately owned bank has been given authority by our Congress to effectively print money as they see fit. Now they call it, right, bonds and buybacks and this and that, but then there's 1,000 different ways that they want to couch those terms, but it's printing money out of thin air. And so there's no intrinsic value in it. And ever since the early 70s, when we got off of the gold standard, there has not been since I think it was 71 or 72, there hasn't been actual value behind it. The value is the future value of the production of the American people. And we have used these greenbacks, these dollars, this what we would call fiat money or symbolic money. It's not real money anymore. And since that can get printed to infinity, scarcity has value. That's why people take fiat, right? Like Michael Saylor says, what do we call people that save in dollars? We call them poor, right? And it's not meant as a slam, even though on Twitter it's often used as a slam, right? Um, it's it's uh, it's because people that put money in a savings account don't recognize the fact that because so many more dollars are being printed, each dollar is worth so much less. And so since there's so much printing of money, people call it inflation. They make it seem like the prices of goods and services are going up. This is too expensive. Nothing's too expensive. The value of your dollar is going down, so you have to exchange more dollars for those same services and goods. And we call this inflation, but even that is, again, a misdirection. So when you realize that our dollars are destined for forever to go down in terms of scarce assets, you see what an investor does and realize why are the rich people, quote unquote, rich people getting richer? It's because they're not saving in dollars. They're saving in hard assets. Real estate, for example, we're watching real estate prices at these extremely high values. We watched it in 07, 08, and then there was this crash, and we watched those numbers go way up again. It's not that one house is more valuable than one house. And if you look at the demand, it's not even that the demand is increasing. It's that that house increases in value because the dollars to buy that house are far cheaper. And with 3% down loans and 0% down loans, the ease of access to get those dollars for basically free is also easier. So they make dollars easier to get, and they make the value of the dollars go down. And what that means is these skyrocketing house prices, skyrocketing egg prices, right? Anything that's not in a dollar is going to go up in terms of dollar. So one of the things that real estate investors, I'm a real estate investor, like we got into it in 2010 and we've been in it ever since. And so as a real estate investor, you recognize if I have dollars sitting on the sidelines that aren't being deployed, that aren't being used for an investment asset, they're going to go down by the inflation rate. And our nominal inflation rate, or the inflation rate that our government says is, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6%, and all of those are lies. If you look at the real inflation rate, it's well over 25%. So if you put $1,000 in the bank today and you let it sit for a year, you're going to be able to buy about $750 worth of stuff. It's an invisible tax issued by our government via the Federal Reserve. And so when you realize why is everything so expensive, it's not that it's more expensive and your dollars are worth less. And at some point, every fiat currency becomes worthless, not just worth less and less, but becomes completely worthless. Every fiat currency, and we have been a fiat currency since the early 70s now, right? So we're over 50 years of a fiat currency, and no fiat currencies make it past 100-ish years. You could make the argument that we really started being a fiat currency in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, and to some extent, there's some truth in that. So we're really pushing the edge of the boundary of how long the US dollar can last. It can't last for forever. No fiat currency has ever lasted for forever, meaning no, and by fiat, I mean, again, no currency that doesn't have a real tangible asset backing it. So when we used to back our dollars with gold, there was relative stability, even though you can still look at the inflation rate from 1913 with the implementation of the Federal Reserve to the early 70s where we got off the gold reserve, there was still heavy inflation. And then when we removed the last bit of non-fiat component of our currency is going to zero. And you can see that pretty easily. Gotcha. So when we lose the last component of backing to our currency in the 70s, we became a full fiat currency without even the pretending that there was a real asset. And so that's in a nutshell our dollar, right? And so what Bitcoin has done is it's created a way to create digital scarcity that has not been seen before previous to Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin created this, what we would call a crypto revolution, or however you want to define it. And there's been 10,000 new cryptos a day that are attempting to do something, and 99.999% of them are just trash, if not pushing near 100%, right? And so Bitcoin has created an opportunity to own something that is truly scarce. And another thing, so there's a few value propositions of Bitcoin that in my mind stick out pretty significantly. It's truly scarce, meaning there's a 21 million hard cap supply. You can't print more of it. You can't make more of it. If people decide they want to run a spinoff, they can split it, they can fork the chain, but the original Bitcoin chain will always be there, and it will always be capped at 21 million in total supply. So you can't ever change that. It's 21 million. Another thing that it does is it increases daily scarcity. So Bitcoin is mined, and what mining is, and I come at it from a contractor perspective, right? So one of our businesses was a general contracting firm. And so from a contractor perspective, as not a coder, right? I'm not the guy that's saying, hey, you're solving digital complex equations. That's true, right? At a digital level, but at a practical level, you're converting electricity, which is a hard asset. There's fossil fuels that go into it. There's cabling, there's copper, there's microchips. These are hard assets to turn turbines, to turn steam engines, to turn some form of motor to generate this electricity. Those are all backed. Those are all things that are backing this asset. So it is actually a backed asset. It's not just not fiat. It's one of the only truly immutable and provably, demonstrably scarce and backed assets by a real world asset that the world has ever seen. So it's one of the only backed assets. It's one of the only truly scarce assets. And when I say truly scarce, people always refer to gold and silver, right? But the problem with gold and silver is they're not truly scarce. So like, for example, the ocean floor is covered with gold reserves. There are untold numbers of tons of gold right now sitting on this planet that are still sitting in the mountains. And the reason is because we are going after the low-hanging fruits. So gold right now, call it, I don't know what it is today, but call it $2,000, $2,500. It's been in that range, right? So call it $2,000. So if gold is $2,000 an ounce, businesses will only mine gold if it is so easy to get to that it costs less than $2,000 per ounce to get. But there's a ton of reserves at $5,000. There's people that have identified many mountains that they're like, when gold hits $5,000, I own this mountain, and that gold in that mountain costs $4,000 to get to. So I'm going to make a 25% profit by mining that gold out and selling it for $5,000. When gold hits $5,000, gold mines are going to explode everywhere. And now what that does is that increases the supply. So the reason we have a theoretically scarce gold, silver, copper, titanium, like all these, different rare earth minerals and metals, the reason they're considered scarce is because at the price today, they are scarce, but the supply can always change with the demand. The supply and demand curve will always meet. And so when the supply and demand curve meet higher on the price, now you're able to increase the supply. Bitcoin, you can't. And not only can you not increase the supply, but every 4 years, there's a thing called a halving, which means the amount of Bitcoin produced every single day is predetermined by the algorithm. That's the amount you get every single day. And then 4 years from now, or in this case, 3 years from now, right? We're recording 25 and the halving was last year. So 4 years or 3 years from now, that amount that's daily produced will also get cut in half. And then 4 years after that, it'll get cut in half. 4 years after that, it'll get cut in half. And so Bitcoin isn't just finite in total amount ever being able to be produced, but it is also increasingly scarce. It's twice as scarce every 4 years. So the scarcity is on an exponentially vertical curve, meaning it's exponentially more and more scarce every 4 years, and it will never exceed a maximum amount. And so when you have a hard asset like that increases in scarcity, even if the demand stayed the same, the price will continue to explode vertically because it's a supply and demand curve. And so if your demand is flat, but your supply is going down, price goes up. But the increased demand of Bitcoin, coupled with the exponentially decreasing supply of Bitcoin, creates this massive vertical spike in price, and then it settles back down. And people think that that's volatility, and it is, right? They think that volatility, that short-term volatility, warrants it to be a risky asset, but it is not a risk-on asset. It is a risk-off asset. If you're looking for an asset to hold for longer than 4 years, I'm unaware of anybody that's been able to hold a Bitcoin. In fact, I think mathematically it's impossible to have bought a Bitcoin on a cold wallet and let it sit there for 4 years and lose money. It's impossible. It's just a 4-year cycle. So what happens is people, they get their emotions involved. Oh, it's going to go up for forever. They buy at the top. And then a year later, the price crashes, right? And the crash is higher than the last top. And they say, oh, I lost half of my money or whatever, and I'm out. I don't like the volatility. But nobody who buys Bitcoin and holds it for 4 years has ever lost money. And it doesn't matter where you are in the cycle, you always make money on that 4-year cycle. And so when you look at the scarcity increasing and the demand increasing, so supply is going down, demand is going up, and demand doesn't even have to go up. The demand can just stay flat, but it is going up. So demand goes up and supply goes down. You are forced mathematically into an exponentially ever increasing price in terms of fiat. So in the same way that real estate gets more expensive, but it's not, that 1,500 square foot house is still worth one 1,500 square foot house. It's not that it's changed. It's that your dollar has changed. And the same thing with Bitcoin. One Bitcoin will always equal one Bitcoin, just like 1 acre in that zip code will always equal 1 acre in that zip code. But as the dollar denomination of it changes, all that does is properly reflect the true degradation of your dollar. So when we look at, so it's super scarce and increasing in scarcity. And if you look at the exponential demand curve, it's going up and it's backed by a hard asset in the form of electricity. But that's just the scarcity side of it. There's another component of it that's the banking side of it. The banking side of it is also just as revolutionary, if not even more so, than the scarcity side of it. The banking side of it is this. Again, dealing with real estate, if I want to buy or sell a piece of real estate, I have to, the day of closing, I have to notarize a big fat packet of documents, sign and notarize. They send a notary to your house. In the old days, you have to go to the title agent and they do it. You sign all these documents, and then I have to go to the bank and sit in front of a teller, prove who I am, and then authorize a wire, double check the transactions, the numbers in the accounts, and make sure they're right. Because if you mess up, you can't get it back. And then I double verify it. And then I send it from my regions teller. I send it to, they send it to their computer bank in California. That computer verifies it in a hard warehouse of computers, which is, I'm sitting at one, right? But on decentralized currencies. They send it to a hard warehouse of computers, and that sends it to, say, Bank of America. And Bank of America confirms that those are the funds from, and that's the bank account too. And then they send it to that teller. So now you've got at least 4 different real buildings with at least 4 different real people, with all of this complexity behind it that has to be managed and operated by individuals to maintain the farm, their server farms. And then a real teller in another brick and mortar store will say to the Bank of America, will tell that customer, your funds have been wired. And then it goes to the title agent verifies it in their brick and mortar, and it goes to the other bank. So you've got all of these banking institutions that, with all of their fees and all of their costs and all of the greenhouse gas emissions, right, that are being used to do that. And Bitcoin simplifies the entire process. It antiquates it as much as the internet antiquated the fax machine. People used to not get on the internet and send emails. They say, why do I need an email? I have a fax machine. We now laugh at those people, right? And to an extent, all of us at some point were that person, right? Or at least the vast majority of us said, well, I got a fax machine. What do I need an email for? Oh, that's complex. I don't have to remember a password, right? And so people used to look at the internet in the same way that they're looking at crypto now. That's risky. That's a newfangled technology. It's going to go away. Look at old articles of the people when they're in the 90s talking about the internet. It's just a fad. It's a passing fad. It's going away. The internet can't go away. You can't undo Pandora's box. Good or bad, you can't undo it. And there's good and bad behind it, right? And the same thing with Bitcoin. There's good and bad behind everything. Anything can be used for good or for bad. Any technological advance, right? But you can't undo Bitcoin. And so for Bitcoin to go to infinity in terms of US dollars, all it requires is 2 people that believe it's a hard asset. But we're not talking 2 people. We're talking many, many millions of people that already believe it, that already use it, that are already completely sold out to it. And there's at least hundreds of thousands of people that would never sell their Bitcoin and would be ecstatic to buy more because they understand the technology. It's going to infinity, and it only takes 2 believers in the buying and the selling of the value of a Bitcoin for it to go to infinity. And we're in the millions now in terms of people that believe in this asset. So you can't undo Pandora's box. You might as well join in while it's cheap. Because it's going to infinity in terms of fiat, and people say, oh, it's $100,000 or so, or 85 or whatever it is now. They look at that short-term volatility and they think, well, how am I gonna do this, right? Like, how am I gonna buy something that's at the all-time high? Well, it was at its all-time high when it was at $1.06, and then it went to an all-time high of $106, and then it went to an all-time high of $16,000, and then $69,000, and then $105,000 or $106,000. And in a cycle from now, it'll be $350,000, and it'll be $1.2 million, and it'll be $8 million, it'll be $12 million. Like, there is no stopping the algorithm. And because you can't stop the algorithm, you can't stop the upward trajectory of the value of Bitcoin.
So this is, I love this conversation. I love that you break it down in such an interesting way, and you also bring your real estate experience into it. What I wanted to, we're going to dive into this when you are on the virtual conference next Tuesday. We're going to talk about the business of being in the Bitcoin mining business. But what are your thoughts on we're going to kind of jump into the Bitcoin mining side of things. What are your thoughts on the future of Bitcoin mining?
Cutthroat, right? Right now, to be really competitive in Bitcoin mining, you have to have an extremely aggressive electric rate. And by extremely aggressive, I mean, 4 and 5 cents as your out the door cost. And you have to have newer equipment and computers. It's going to become, I believe we're already watching it becoming increasingly centralized. Like when Bitcoin was first launched, it was fully decentralized. It was a bunch of guys in their mom's basement mining off of GPUs, right? And then it stopped being that, and it started being a bunch of smaller mines like we are, right? And so it was a bunch of smaller mines, and mines started popping up when they started popularizing the use of the modern ASIC, right? Application specific integrated circuit, which we actually refer to as the whole computer now, right? This is a 35-pound computer that's like a foot and a half by less than a foot by a foot, right? And so we're going to watch, I think, as BlackRock and Grayscale gobbles up these massive amount, and all these 12 Bitcoin ETFs, as they gobble up Bitcoin, they continue to also buy shares in the publicly mined companies. And so these companies are getting bigger, which allows them to get more aggressive electric prices. And what that does is it kind of squeezes out the little guy, right? Which is pretty much par for the course with every industry. That's not specific or unique to Bitcoin. That's just par for the course. And so if you're going to be competitive in Bitcoin mining, you have to have an extremely, extremely aggressive electric rate so that you can profitably mine Bitcoin. Because again, you're converting electricity into Bitcoin. And so if you're converting electricity into Bitcoin, the cheaper your electricity rate, the cheaper is the cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold compared to the market value of the goods that you're selling them at is probably the number one business metric of what makes a successful business in any industry. It doesn't matter if you're fabricating shirts or purses or whatever. You have to make sure that the cost of goods sold is less than what you're selling that cost at, that asset at. And so you can look at the electric rate that you have as effectively defining your cost of goods sold. So your equipment type that you have and the electric rate together will tell you what the cost of goods sold are that you have. And then as the price of Bitcoin, when the price of Bitcoin dips, if your cost of goods sold go above that, you unplug the computers, or at least from a business perspective, you should, right? From a long-term investment standpoint, you might not, and many people don't. But from a business perspective, for a little guy, you kind of have to. And so if your cost of goods sold is higher than the market value of Bitcoin, then you unplug them. And then when the market value of Bitcoin increases, which it inevitably will, then you plug them back in, and now you're able to maintain a profitable mine. And so there's a lot of components to that, but it's really just cost, right? What's your cost of goods sold, and what can you sell it for?
Yeah, the future is bright. I think I've been doing a study on the different industries, like the oil and gas industry, the gold industry, and Bitcoin mining industry, finding parallels and differences in the market cap, the number of employees, and just in general, the business. And what I found fascinating is that there's a big artisanal gold mining industry, very small, independent miners that are in Africa or in other countries that are a little bit more remote. They're able to mine gold on a very small scale by using innovative techniques and resources. And I believe that Bitcoin has a similar future with using innovation as the accelerator to overcome the big guys. Like, we can't buy electricity cheaper from the electric company, but we could find an alternative source of energy to replace it. And there's no such thing as free electricity, but if you have a flare or stranded gas, or you're using some type of waste recycle or something like that, you can get in that optimal range that you talked about, that sub 4.5
Yeah.
range.
There's a bunch of opportunities for that. I think this next cycle, our intention to switch to a stranded gas uh, product. And there's so much stranded gas in this country. If you look at the statistics and the demographics and the amount of stranded gas that's available, I mean, all the way from through Appalachia, all of Texas, there's so much access to really, really cheap electricity that it's just a function of deploying it. And one of the beauties of Bitcoin is I think that Bitcoin is actually the best possible thing. Like if you're concerned about the greenhouse gas emissions, right? If you're concerned about global warming, the single greenest thing you could do is mine Bitcoin. And there's a few reasons for that. Is one is Bitcoin mining is driving innovation because it driving down the cost of electricity is every miner's number one concern, right? How can I drive down the cost of my electricity? And the way that you do that, everything from recaptured heat to solar to wind to turbines to stranded gas, flare gas, these are energy sources that are not able to be used by the regular consumer, right? So stranded gas, for example, is there's a gas well here or 1,000 gas wells here, and gas is so cheap that it doesn't make sense for us to pull it out of the ground and to put it in tankers and to ship it, because the cost of the fuel to ship the gas is so prohibitively expensive that it means that we're selling our product at less than the cost of goods sold. So stranded gas is effectively an unplugged Bitcoin miner, right? An unplugged Bitcoin miner saying, hey, the cost of goods sold is too high right now, meaning either the hash rate's too high, or how many computers are sharing on this network is too high, or my computers are too low grade, or my electricity cost is too high, but my cost of goods sold is higher than Bitcoin price, so I can't mine it. The same thing happens in the real world asset of stranded gas and flare gas. The gas price nationwide the natural gas price is so low that they have so much reserves of natural gas, but they can't use it, because by the time you pay the money to get it out of the ground and put it in a tanker and go, it's not selling for $2.39 a pound or $3 a pound or whatever, $5 a pound. It might cost them $10 a pound to get it out of the ground. And so when you look at stranded gas as partnering with, for example, or flare gas or some of these things that are already being produced, and you compare that to an unplugged Bitcoin miner, those two things go hand in hand. And it's even green when you look at what happens to grid options. So like we're on the grid, right? We're connected directly to the city utilities. And so when you look at grid, the grid has to be able to support the maximum demand at any given time. And so let's say that your grid demands 1 megawatt as a max. So they might have a 2 megawatt production. So the utility company might produce 2 megawatts because it needs to be able to take a peak in case it goes from 1 megawatt to 1.5 megawatts, right? And so what a Bitcoin mine does is it comes into these areas and says, hey, I'm going to provide the utility with a base layer of perpetual use, because we don't unplug. We just stay mining right now. I'm surrounded right now on either side with computers that are mining. And so they stay plugged in 24/7. So there's no peak where we need more power at one part of the day, because everybody just got home from work and they're turning on their ovens and their AC units, right? So it provides this base layer of money to the grid so that they can continue to upgrade and improve efficiency on the grid. So not only does Bitcoin mining make the grid more green, but it also allows the grid to grow and expand into areas where people might not have access to cheap electricity, and all of a sudden you can. So there's story after story of Bitcoin mines that are popping up in impoverished countries where they have the natural resources, but they don't have the money to get to them. And so a mining company will go in and say, hey, I'll build a tiny micro power plant. It might be a megawatt or 2 megawatts or something to that effect. I'll build a 2 megawatt plant and we'll only use 1 megawatt of it if you give us your natural resources for free. So now their electric bill is zero. It's just operational costs, the operational expenses to build that site and keep it. So their perpetual electric bill is basically zero, just the maintenance of operating it. And then they'll sell at dirt cheap prices the excess megawatt to the surrounding community. So now people that have never had access to electricity are able to get access to electricity. there's small mines like this that are popping up over and over. They're doing it on hydroelectric power. They're even doing it on a wind power, right? They're doing it in all these other mechanisms, and they're going to these countries that have hidden resources or resources that are currently not being used and accessed. And they're creating an electrical grid where there was no grid. And this should be viewed as a beautiful thing, because one of the primary precipitous causes of explosive innovation and economic growth in an area is the access to free and or cheap electricity and power. If you have electricity and power, you can do a lot more stuff than you can if you have no electricity, right? And so Bitcoin mining is driving this process. It's driving the green revolution, if you will, to turn everything to more and more efficient, because they care, we all care super deeply about our electric prices, and they're providing electrical infrastructure to places that have none, and without that couldn't get out of this cycle of poverty. So it's this really beautiful thing where it's helping people that need it. It's driving down the overall cost of electricity for your average consumer, because with that extra revenues, like in Florida, for example, Florida has the type of electrical grid where they're not allowed to make a profit, but it's a monopoly, essentially. So one company will own one specific type of one company will own one specific area, and you can't shop it out. Like in Texas, you can shop out who your electrical provider is. You can't do that in Florida. And so if you provide that extra profitability to the grid, it forces, in the state of Florida, everybody else's bill down. And then you see like companies like FPL in Florida, for example, they're the number one Bitcoin miners in the state because they own the electrical grid, and they realize I can make free money off of these turbines that are already running. You can't just shut down a turbine or a generator because there's not a demand. You still have to keep it going, even if it can produce a megawatt and you're only using 0.1 megawatt, you're still burning the same amount of fossil fuels. And so they realize, wait, if I can throw a half a megawatt of extra power on here, I'll still be using no more fossil fuels, but now I'm able to convert some of that excess electricity into usable electricity that we call Bitcoin. And so that process, it allows excess electricity and stranded power that should be converted into electricity. It allows that to be harnessed and converted into things that we call Bitcoin and sent as a value with a dollar value attached to it, or a Bitcoin value attached to it, anywhere in the world without needing to go through the banks and all that. So it really allows you to, with a Starlink connection and a single stranded gas well, produce Bitcoin for effectively free, which would, when people do that, those are the extremely profitable mines, when they're able to access that type of free stranded power.
That is, this conversation's just been fascinating. You just really broke down a lot about Bitcoin, how to explain what Bitcoin is, the value, the wealth of it, how it's mirrors and using the metaphors of the banking system and real estate. And then your explanation of Bitcoin mining has just been spot on. It's fascinating, and it's great to hear you speak. I can't wait to hear you speak more at our virtual conference next Tuesday on March 11th. It's going to be a full day. We're going to start at 9 in the morning, go till 7 o'clock at night. And we're going to have conversations with people just like you. We're going to be talking about the Bitcoin mining business and ways that we can optimize our mine. But you specifically are going to be talking about the business of being in the Bitcoin mining business. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. We're going to save some of this for that. And then I'm going to see you next week at our virtual mining conference brought to you by Bitcoin Mining World.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, John. It's been a pleasure being here.